Hi everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming to see us after lunch. We have got a slight, we're calling it a pivot from the advertised session. Inani Bambara Aban, who is Technology Officer for the British Council and a robotics engineer, was supposed to be here in my place in conversation with Shama Rahman for this session, Beyond Human, Robotics, Neuro-AI and the Creative Self, which is now Beyond Human, Neuro-AI and the Creative Self, without the robotics bit, I'm afraid. So I'm going to have to ask for your forgiveness and your generosity as an audience for us to kind of muddle our way through. My name is Katie Popwell. I work as a programme consultant for Beyond Conference. I'm also chair of Manchester UNESCO City of Literature and a friend of Shama Rahman's, and I'm familiar with some of her work, although as many of you will discover today, it's not something that you can be entirely familiar with because of the incredible complexity that we're gonna learn a bit about today. But we're here to talk about neurotechnology, an area that's opening up new possibilities for enhancing human creativity and cognition, and how this might have implications for how we learn and work and express ourselves. So we're seeing the potential for these kind of tools that we're going to have a look at today to move from R&D labs into classrooms, into studios, into workplaces, and really raise questions about what it means to start to collaborate with machines. And we're going to look at some examples of how embodied neuro-AI can extend human creative practice and potentially sort of change some conditions for learning, for expression, and what the considerations are that should guide their development. Yes, so we were going to be discussing embodied robotics as well, although we've our pivot is that Shama has brought some wearables with her, which we are going to be demonstrating for you. So again, we ask for your generosity as an audience. But with me today, we have Dr. Shama Rahman, a scientist, artist, and creative technologist. She holds a PhD in neuroscience and complex systems of creative cognition and innovation. She is founder and CEO of Neurocreate, which uses a mixture of AI and neuroscience to enhance cognition. So the company has been selected as one of the top 100 creative companies by the Creative Industries Council, and Shama has won a number of accolades, including Creative Visionary of the Year at AthenaX Awards, and one of the top 20 most inspirational women in tech by TechRound. As an artist, her work has explored using wearable technologies to enhance storytelling. She's also a composer and a multi-instrumentalist. And this is a great one, this is my favourite Shama fact, the first sitarist explorer to perform in Antarctica in the first ever Antarctic Biennale. So please welcome Shama Rahman. Thank you. Shama, thanks so much for joining us. Okay, so we're just going to run through a couple of little bits of housekeeping. The lights are going to go on and off a couple of times. Is everybody all right with that? If that is a problem for anyone, can you raise your hand? Okay, good, thank you. Can I all ask you to turn your Bluetooth off on your phones, please? Which will give us a much better chance of everything working the way that we want it to work. And then the other thing to say is that we're going to have a bit of a chat. We're going to do a little bit of a demo of a couple of the Neurocreate products, and then we will open up to the audience. Hopefully we will also have time for a couple of audience questions as well. I think that's everything in terms of housekeeping. So we're going to hand over now to Shama, so from studying creativity and flow to building these tools that support them, tell us about A, what is flow, and B, how have you ended up here?
Okay. So I did a PhD in the sort of mists of time looking at the neuroscience of creativity. I originally wanted to look at consciousness, but was veered away from something like that. I was like, do that potentially at the end, but And I was obviously doing really well with that. But I was quite insistent, and I thought creativity was on the other side of the coin to consciousness, because it was a sort of a mechanism, or let's say a manifestation of consciousness. So I ended up looking at creative processes, specifically within music, looking at jazz and jazz improvisation and classical interpretation with piano players. And it was a very, very sort of, I would say, complex PhD from the perspective of I wanted to be rather exploratory. I wanted to look at what were the sort of physiological markers or underpinnings to why we do things the way we do when it comes to creative practices. You know, is that because we've been taught that way, or is there some sort of psychological or, actual brain behavior link there? And so doing that, that's how I ended up finding a signature brain pattern for one of the stages of the creative process, which is the creative flow state. So when I say creative processes, that's because we don't just have one, right? There's a lot of different things we end up utilizing. We have an entire creative toolkit. So I'm sure you guys have heard about things like divergent and convergent and the aha moment and all these kinds of elements, right? So some of it are very sort of blue sky ideation. Some of it's very much like, oh, I now have loads of ideas. How do I kind of pick them? In terms of, putting your analytical head on, and then you going, ooh, in the shower, that's the brilliant, £1 million idea kind of thing. And then the flow state. So the flow state is something that was coined as a sort of altered state of consciousness by a positive psychologist after World War II called Csikszentmihalyi. So if any of you guys are Hungarian, I hope did I say it correctly? Yes, amazing. That's probably the first Hungarian I've had in this conversation. Nice. Yay! So he went around essentially interviewing a whole bunch of people after World War II, trying to find out what made them happy, which is a really loaded question in some ways, especially when you have lots of people maybe suffering from PTSD. So they didn't give him a straight answer. They started describing to him a group of properties where they would be like, you know what, I was embedded in this activity, I got totally lost in it, I lost track of time, I was very, very engaged. I was able to solve problems faster, I was more creative, the kind of quality of my work was much better, I felt like at the peak of my performance, I felt like I was flowing, right? And so from there was how he picked out that term. But he did also find that they were saying things like, I felt super sort of intrinsically motivated, no one's telling me to do this, and I feel like a sense of achievement and purpose, and almost ecstatic. So he found his happiness in the end, but it didn't come on its own. So that's what flow is, and I guess it's not surprising that you find that in creative processes, but it also leads to higher creativity.
And the product that what we're going to be looking at today is not about individual flow, though, is it? It's about flow in unity with others, in collaboration with others. Yeah. So, do you want to explain how this works? And we will take the light down, and I am going to put one of these on my head.
Okay, so basically, what we've tried to do is use off-the-shelf wearables, right? These are things you can buy, these are not ours, and the idea is to make it really accessible. We've built this entire system so it works with Bluetooth, which is why we got you to turn your phones Bluetooth off. And essentially, it picks up raw data. When I say raw data, I mean raw brain data, utilizing these kinds of electrodes at the front. And so why is that? Our brain is full of nerves, and nerves communicate with each other using electricity. So the other things that it also picks up is electricity, as you can see, right? So because of that, we're using deep learning models, which is a kind of an AI that is very good at classifying complex patterns. And it also brings, tries to get rid of, what we call artifacts or noise. So, for example, things like the electrical mains, or, my eye movements, or doing this, and all of these kind of produce also electricity in our muscles. So we're not really looking for that. We're looking for the electricity from the head. And so those AI models essentially can pick up our levels of flow state. And so that original signature brain pattern that I found, which actually was found utilizing 64 channels, and then we found specific areas of the brain that we found we could actually pick up from the frontal bit. So Katie's going to demonstrate as well. So do that. Wonderful hair, Okay, can you see? Yeah. Okay, so what we have here are two kind of halos around our face, right? And so I was able to, I'm probably gonna put this back on, I can't see, I'm pretending. There we go. I basically came here and I went, ooh, what's my favorite color, and or what's the color of the day, right? It's something that I prefer, and it's something that I like, right? So there's a little bit of gamification that we're sort of bringing in here. So I chose Coral Sunset, and Katie chose, I suppose, an ocean blue.
An ocean blue, I think.
Yeah, and so the idea here is that the more in flow I am, and Katie is, the more in glow we are, right? So the idea is that through sort of visually aesthetic manners, we are being positively nudged into the flow state. So let me unpack that a little bit. Essentially, we have a number from 0 to 1. 0 means we're really not in flow, 1 means we really are in flow. So it's a sliding scale of probability, it's not like a binary. And so we've mapped that color so that it's essentially nothing, let's say when it's at 0, and really full on when it's at 1. So you can kind of see it kind of ebbing and flowing, right?
And we are doing this sitting next to each other, but we don't have to be sitting next to each other, do we? We can be anywhere.
Yes, so I could be in Antarctica if they had Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
You could be here, which is essentially really interesting because we call this social flow.
Mm-hmm.
I firmly believe that we can get into flow easier with other people. And in fact, some of the things that we're doing here is utilizing creative activities that we can do together to help us get there.
Really close to you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for example, we do things like humming together, and that actually helps us essentially ground and actually have the same kind of breathing rhythms, which helps with a sort of a synchrony. And then we get into like a word association game, sort of really fast. I say tree, you say
branch.
There you go.
Took me a minute.
Right, and then we up the ante a bit and make those phrases and essentially that kind of storytelling through phases.
And being in conversation is an expression of that as well, isn't it? So the idea of me and Shama sitting in front of you being in conversation with this on is that you should be able to see the colours change. And the more that we speak to each other and the more that we connect with each other, you can see that expressed on the screen.
Yes, and we've done some sort of little pilot studies utilising an XR version of this, which is like a hologramic art piece with some NHS trusts, and essentially after just one 15-minute session we showed an improvement in social connectedness, improvement in mood. People actually felt that they were actively in control, so self-regulating their brain activity. So remember what I said about the colour being a positive nudger? The idea is your brain goes, ooh, I like that colour. How do I get that colour back? Oh, this is what I need to do, essentially. And when that brain pattern matches the flow state, it's essentially rewarded with this feedback. And this is a way of self-regulating without needing medication to actually change your brain activity, which then essentially leads to different mental states as well. So hence, flow is very useful for mood, attention, intrinsic motivation, all kinds of things like that.
So let's talk a bit more about the applications and the outputs for this then. So you've talked a bit about how it might be used in a healthcare context, particularly in talking about affecting people's mental states. What are the other applications for this? Why would somebody use this?
So I, being a performer, had to find some way to bring it back to that. And just to give you a little example, if the sound is on, that'd be really great. It was real. So here we have a 360 projection of my flow state, and not just me, we also have audiences coming in and essentially putting on one of these and participating in the actual the whole music, and also their brain states and their mental sort of flow states also being shown. And the idea here is to, I can't hide behind an instrument here, you'll know if I'm in flow or not. So, does that help me essentially be more present and actually, give it my all when it comes to the performance, but also to connect with my audience, and whether that creates a different kind of environment for an empathy, or like a different kind of experience for that kind of performance setup. And here we've also got the ability to essentially link it up to lights, and a light installation that you see behind me. So this was at the UN's AI for Good Summit, and people were really interested in brain-computer interfaces for some reason. So we had to kind of show what that really
I think
meant.
it's just because they look cool.
Yeah, right? I was like, okay, you really want that? So you see there. So the colors are essentially flickering between blue and red. Red meaning I'm really not in flow. So you can see how nervous I am. It's the first time I actually did this. And it gets into it as I get into the choruses, and I kind of calm down, which I think is interesting in and of itself. And then one last one here, you can see it's a massive LED bank of screens behind me. And the visualizations here are more artistic. So the more complex they are, the more in flow I am. And also you'll see later in it, when I look at it, that same neurofeedback happens and I get more into flow. So there's that immersion coming.
Is my brain activity
from the audience's, from the performer's perspective as well. Yeah.
So let's go back to if we go back to our representations of our flow state here, let's just go back to what you were saying about activities that we can do that will increase connections between us, and things that we can do if we're perhaps not sitting next to each other, and if you're in the Antarctic with your Wi-Fi and I'm in Brighton. Like, what are the things that we can do, and how does AI come into this?
One of the things I showed you was sort of creative techniques. Obviously, we've been chatting, and maybe that's a really nice thing to do anyway, but just in case you don't know each other and you want to kind of get into this session together, the creative techniques are a really interesting icebreaker as well. But creativity in particular has been shown to reverse brain age. So there has been very new work that's come out of Edinburgh University as well, where they've looked at creative professions, so maybe more on the expression side of professions, let's say artists, right? And they actually created a brain index looking at the sort of age of the brain, and found that to be a lot younger rather than the biological age of people who are not maybe in these creative professions. So, a 50-year-old essentially who's a creative has a younger brain, which I think is quite interesting, and why we're looking at these kinds of mechanisms, because that creativity, say for example the storytelling, and we just went, oh, branch, or whatever, right? And so that helps us bring in this cognitive flexibility, and that's a really important part of flow as well, but also helps your mind to remain sort of able to do innovation and problem solving, and that kind of on its toes in a way. And we've got the ability to then bring in AI that essentially can facilitate as well in a much more interactive way, and it has a knowledge of the flow state as well. So in the sense that, say you're really not in flow, it will be much more encouraging and be like, we've got a little bit more to go, let's like create sort of more interesting, creative associations with the word games, for example. Or say you're all the way at point 8 with this kind of flow state. It's like, you're there, let's go, let's maintain, right? So it's got this, what I like calling it, it's a cognitive AI, affective AI, and a sort of a mental AI, knowing and personalizing how it interacts with you to help you get there.
Okay, so we're going to look at a few different applications of this kind of thing. So what we're looking at the moment is Zeitgeist, which is this. But we're also going to look at another Neurocreate platform, which is Innovator, isn't it? So we are going to take this off now,
Okay.
sorry. And we can... Oh no, we don't want to put lights back up yet, do we? Because we're going to look at some more. Yeah, actually, let's put the lights up for a bit, and we'll have a bit of a chat before we go on to the next... Oh, that's quite bright. Okay. So, I mean, can you give some examples of when collaboration with machines in this way can produce genuinely new outcomes rather than just speeding up what is already happening, and how it can actually enhance or alter human cognition rather than it just being an accelerator.
I think it's really useful to design these AI systems with a knowledge of how the brain works, especially if we are trying to look at creativity. So this comes in really handy, having done something in creative cognition, because how do we, in general, human to human, come up with new things? So that can essentially sort of inform the way that we interact with the AI. So instead of being like, write me a book, give me the whole kind of shebang already done, can there be step-by-step ways of kind of bringing in different ideas from different domains, helping spark little topics here, bringing in different kinds of rules, for example, as well. So there's lots of different design thinking, and this also includes engineering-based ways of looking at creativity in order to help sort of engender and enable new kind of outputs as well.
So we had a discussion panel in here just before lunch, which was around copyright and around the ethical training of generative AI. Obviously, this is a very different form of AI, but what you're talking about in terms of using prompts does intersect with that world of generative AI as well. So there's an interesting question here about whose creativity is being optimized, whose data is being used, and who is excluded and who benefits from that. How do you position what you're doing in relation to those questions?
So always human in the loop. Always human in the loop. So this is maybe a nice example of improving human-to-human connection. We're not doing anything that hasn't been generated by your own brain, in this case, and we're really firmly positioning the AI as I suppose as an enabler rather than a replacer. I mean, this could not have happened without any humans involved. So, but then that same idea comes into any one of our other products as well. Like I said, it's not about let's just use AI for kind of production. Let's also think about thinking, etc., which is a little bit upstream as well. So how can we fundamentally improve our own creative cognition, our own kind of thinking frameworks, where AI is let's say, not only a facilitator, but also a provocateur, like you would have with any other kind of conversation that we're having, for example, right? Any other human. So how can we sort of really drill down into the human-computer interaction design?
Okay, so let's have a little look at Innovator then, because we want to understand a little bit more how this can facilitate, like you say, human-to-human interaction. Now, humans are quite good at human-to-human interaction. You get people together in a room, we know how to talk to each other, we can come up with ideas, and we've spent many, many centuries developing that. But it does have limitations, and often can have limitations in terms of, for example, power differentials within a group, the ability people have to get together, technology. Since we all started working remotely with each other, we have seen that there are some challenges for this. And so what I think is interesting about this is coming back to that idea of speed, but also changing the ways that people might be able to work together, certainly remotely. Can we bring the lights down a minute, just so that Shama can talk through this one?
So this is an example of many people coming together and essentially collaborating. And we've got the ability to have 8 people in a workshop setting to come in together. In this case, we had students, we had some academics, but also general public, if you want to call it. And the whole workshop here was a little bit meta, trying to think about collaborative ways of coming up with creative applications for AI, but also ethics and policy, for example. And we had a few things that we were able to upload, for example, like I said, in ethics and education, like a little bit of a summary of some of those themes that we essentially wanted to help people start off and springboard with. And they got really interested in, for example, imagination as a kind of a topic. And from there, we were able to generate lots of different kinds of ideas, by coming here and essentially picking up all the different elements that they already sort of brainstormed, for example, futures thinking, or some of those PDF kind of topic modeling there, responsible AI practices, adaptive learning, all these kinds of things, which helps them do that kind of research and helps them see what it is that they might be missing in a more explicit way, so it helps with biases in that kind of a way. And then kind of selecting lots of different things that we can do like that once we have all that laid out and start brainstorming. And so one of the things that they came up with, for example, was a biophilic soundscape installation. And what does that even look like? So we have the ability to kind of generate a little video, very off the hoof. In this Inspire section, it's meant to be very blue sky, so it's deliberately sort of not photorealistic, so just to help with kind of mental imagery. So from that, they were then able to generate, for example, something like this, which is just a little kind of placeholder of what a biophilic soundscape might look like or interact like. And so they didn't sit there like writing prompts. It was very much chain of thought, going you know, let's see how can we take this on to the kind of next section. And on that note, because we were going to do a little bit of robotics,
we were, yeah.
We did also have a symposium on robotics at the Uni of Edinburgh. We had a very quick jotting down of what the experts in robotics were talking about. For example, rearticulating skeletons, or kinematic linkage, or geometrical design, and then essentially utilizing AI to help connect the dots or come up with new kinds of spaces in between and make that more explicit in terms of liminal spaces. For example, a reusability in neurorobotic and composite recycling. And with all of that, we were then able to pick out our favorite ideas. I'm just going to do this in a very breakneck, quick way. These were some of the kind of ideas. What about bio-based materials, or nanofibers and metallic frames, and neck robots, in case you guys haven't heard about that, come and talk to me afterwards, very weird. Advanced biomaterials with self-healing properties, I quite like that one. So these are ideas that came up. This was quite a sort of a industry and research interface here with this kind of conference. So we looked at new ideas that would come up. We also thought about the kind of stakeholders that might be interested in this, from companies to policymakers and academics. And from that, we were then able to not only look at different kinds of products, potentially target audiences, but also look at brand strategies. And again, some sort of images. This is quite a weird one as well. Look at that, grandmother.
So I think, I mean, what's been illustrated there really brilliantly, I think, and it is a bit breakneck, so is that a lot of these things we are familiar with. We've seen brainstorming, mind mapping, audience development, prototyping, visualization. These are all, keystones of research and development, and have always been keystones of research and development. But to be able to do something like this collaboratively and be able to kind of do it at this sort of speed with these sorts of visualization techniques, and thinking about actually using technology to pick up on things like biases and ensuring that you are addressing gaps in knowledge and that kind of thing, feels like it's where the real innovation is. Would you say that that's right?
Yeah, so I think it helps us essentially have a bit of an external representation of the way that our mind works. So when we say mind map, maybe it's a bit of a throwaway comment, but we're really trying to essentially look at how our mind actually associates different topics of each kind of space, and make that much more explicit, and also do research in a much more visual way as well. So being able to essentially, for example, look at a PDF, what's in that document, summarize that, and then go, each layer of let's say, association deeper as we go along with a little bit of topic modeling. So it helps us kind of, literally have a mind map in a way that reflects our actual neurological ways of doing things, but then really trying to help with these kind of, let's say, I call us neurodesign. So essentially having an AI system that's really been designed to follow the steps in that creative process that I was mentioning. So flow state obviously has a signature brain pattern, but so do some of the others. And so if we're talking about right at the beginning when you're researching around a particular topic, it's that kind of preparation. So AI that essentially helps you find those kinds of elements that you didn't know, for example, or help do some new kinds of inspirations from that to really help you do the research. And then ideate here, this is when you essentially incubate all of that lovely juicy information that you just fed your brain, and it can essentially come up with those aha moments. So the AI there is just trying to help you and be like a second brain, but not do your work for you, but help you get that insight essentially by doing lots of pattern detection in a way. And then you have your synthesize, which is, okay, I've got my little aha moment, I now need to create these into fully fledged XYZ. So all of this can then be, exported into a pitch deck, for example.
Has anyone got any questions? We've only got a couple of minutes left. Has anyone got any questions for Shama before we wrap up? Yep, one at the back.
I might have missed this, and this is so impressive. And I have a lot of questions actually, but the burning thing I wanted to ask, if you didn't cover it, was just exactly how the monitors work and what they're measuring.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are just off-the-shelf brain sensing wearables, and we kind of approach this with like an IoT, Internet of Things kind of a way. So essentially, it should work with any brain sensing wearable that has Bluetooth ability and also picks up electrical brain activity from the front part of the brain, essentially, because that is essentially where we are trying to look for a signature brain pattern for the flow mental state, which is that kind of area there. And then what we're doing is a lot of AI to help classify in real time the level of flow that we're in, and how that then maps in a visual and easy to kind of interact with manner. I have one more question.
Yes, thank you for a fascinating presentation. I wanted to ask about the senses and how you see the creative brain flowing, and if you see differences in people being neurodiverse or neurotypical. I think that's quite interesting. So I'm a diverse person myself, but if that shows up in what you're doing.
I think it's a really lovely question because it brings up ideas of homogeneity and heterogeneity, especially when you're thinking about AI models as well. And so in order to find a pattern, and this is actually something really common even in scientific experimental design, you tend to want to go for a particular population, right? Or you go for a completely heterogeneous population because you want to see if there's any impact or effect. But with AI, it needs a pattern to then go, yeah, here's a pattern. So by definition, it needs a homogeneous XYZ population, right? And so this was trained for quote unquote neuronormative, originally the data, was neuronormative data. That being said, that doesn't mean that it's not useful for neurodivergent. We're about to go into a study with young people for ADHD, and we're also looking at mood disorders where there's a brain functionality difference, even if not neurodiverse, but often there's comorbidities. And so we can ask the question, well, do we want to essentially get them to a state that is neuronormative? That's what medication does. But potentially, as you say, ADHD can be a superpower. Do we want that to be normal?
Yeah, especially in creativity.
Yeah, right. And so that's why we're utilizing creativity, because actually this mental state, and I've seen people kind of try it out and tell me qualitatively, ooh, it felt like my brain just went wider. I was like, yeah, is that when you're in flow? Like, yeah. So, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to medicalize and say this is neurodivergent or not, if that makes sense. But I have seen people who have been on ADHD on one end of the spectrum and also an autistic spectrum on the other side. And the ADHD person was like in flow the entire time. The autistic person was like, is there something slightly different with mine? Okay, fine. I don't know because I haven't done enough studies on that and I'd love to. So, yeah.
Well, that's Thank you so much for those brilliant questions, because that's opened up a whole new area of conversation, which I'm sure you can come and find Shama to talk about if you want to. But now you all have an answer to the question, what is Neuro-AI? And you can go forth and tell everybody else about it. Thank you so much to all of you for coming, and to Shama. Thank you.
Thank you very much.